Hello, my drawing friends. My name is Nikki Millie, the artist and creator behind Pencil Pails and Brush Babies. Today, we are going to be working on some of the pencil techniques that we use throughout the video, as well as review the materials and supplies that you received in your box. The first thing we're going to look at is this small piece of watercolor paper that you received in your box. This is smaller than the one that has your raccoon drawn on it because this is just for some of the techniques, the testing that we're going to do in just a few minutes. This is a hot press piece of watercolor paper. Hot press means that it has a smoothness to it. It doesn't have a lot of tooth or texture, where cold press watercolor paper does. It has a lot more tooth, so it's more bumpy. This is great to use for your pencils because it does hold some color, but it kind of slides and glides over the paper. It's one of my favorite papers to use with colored pencil. Okay, the other materials you received in your box are your pencils. Now for this video, we are not going to review the watercolor pencils, but we will use those in the next video. Right now, we're just going to focus on our colored pencils. So you would have received your powder blue, a violet blue, which I love this pencil. I use it a lot, as you can see, a black, sienna brown, a 30% gray, and a 90% gray, and white, which I don't, oh, here's my white, right here, white. Now, you will notice in the second video, when you're actually working on your raccoon, I mentioned a color called light umber. I later decided to remove that color because the only time I used it was for such a small amount, and there's an expense to pencils. So to keep the box a little lower, I decided to remove that color from the box. So when you hear me mention the color light umber in the second video, just go ahead and use your sienna brown. There's no problem with that. Okay, so we have our colored pencils. Some other things that you're going to want is a jar or cup of water. You don't need a lot. You're going to want to have some paper towels. It is nice to have some Scotch tape because I'm going to show you how we can actually lift and erase areas if we need to with Scotch tape. Any kind of eraser. I like my kneaded eraser. A kneaded eraser is one that's pliable like this, so you can clean it, and it's great for like lifting color, not so much erasing, but lifting color off of things. So I use this a lot for all of my drawings. If you don't have a kneaded eraser, a simple pencil eraser will work. You're going to want a nice sharpener. So if you have a hand one, that's fine. This is the Swordfish Omnipoint sharpener. I love this sharpener. I use it for everything. It's a manual sharpener. You do it by hand, and it works so good to get a nice point. If you don't have one of these, that's fine. Just use an electric eraser or a hand eraser or a sharpener. Anything like that will work. But it's very important to sharpen your pencils in colored pencil. So let's get started on just a couple of techniques that we're going to review before we jump into our raccoon drawing, which he's so cute. Okay, so we've got our paper here. So we're just going to use our little scrap for test right now. And the first thing I want you to do is just go ahead and draw just a small circle. Okay, we're just going to play around with, I call this gradient. And basically it's your values, your lights to darks, okay? So in colored pencil, we want to get a nice value when we're using it. Now, on the raccoon, it's just a simple critter. It's a little cartoony, but there is a little bit of realism to him. But when you get into realistic drawings, you want to have a really good base of value and how to get value. So one way to get value is to draw the little circle here. You can take one single color. We'll start with black. And you always want to have a light source. So let's say our light source is coming from that direction. That means that this side of my sphere is lighter and this side of my sphere is darker. You could even put a little like as if it's sitting on a tabletop here. So in order to make this sphere look like it's coming out of the paper, like it's a 3D rather than a 2D object, we do that with shading. So I use these small circular strokes and I start to fill in the dark side of the circle. I go around the edge and start to put some color down into my circle. Okay, just like that. I'm not using a real hard pressure, just very soft. Now as I come towards the light, I'm going to lift off of the pencil the pressure so it gets lighter, because we want it to go from a dark color to a light color on this side where the light's hitting it. And as I come around, so now I'm overlapping my circles, and as I come around the sphere, I'm lifting the pressure on my pencil so it's lighter, all the way to the white. So it gets to a point where it's just white. And I work my way. Don't make your circle too big. That's why I said to make it small, because this, you don't want to spend a lot of time trying to render a little circle. So just kind of working back and forth, just like that. So now before we go any further, I want to talk about pressure, pencil pressure. So let me do that. So I've got this kind of darker edge here, and it goes to a mid-tone. This is our dark, our mid-tone, and our lightest part. And it's created by shadows and light, and that's how we get value in a drawing. So now let's talk about pencil pressure. I have a way to help you understand pencil pressure. So when I say a pencil pressure of 1, what I mean is basically like a glaze. Okay, it's very soft. You're skimming the paper. So if I were to take my hand and do a 1, I'm not moving my skin at all. It's just sitting on the top of my skin. See that? I'm glazing my page. It's very light pressure. If I were to say a pencil pressure of 2, I'm starting to put a little bit of pressure on the pencil, but not a lot. So you can kind of see my skin divot a little bit. It's not really moving though, it's just kind of divoting. So you can feel it. There's a little bit more pressure on the pencil. Now a 3, and be careful you don't hurt yourself, it's got more pressure. And now you can kind of see my skin moving back and forth. That's a pressure of 3. A 4 and 5 we don't want to do on our hand, so we would do that down on the paper. So if I have a 1 here, which is skimming, this is the 30% gray, and then a 2, which is a little more pressure, a 3, a little more pressure, a 4 is going to be kind of, you're starting to put some pressure onto the pencil, and a 5 is what we use for burnishing, for blending, and that's really, really hard. Sometimes with a 5 pressure, you break the tip of the pencil. So you can kind of see these different pressures, okay? So we have a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 5. You'll get used to using those throughout your practice. At first it might be a little difficult. A lot of times people want to use like a 4 or 5 right away because they want results quickly. You don't want to do that with colored pencil. A lot of your preliminary layers are going to be in your 1 and 2 pressure. 5 is definitely only for blending. You really want to push hard on that. And then sometimes you go to a 3. So when you hear me refer to that in the video, in the next video, that's what I'm talking about. So up here, if I go back to the black, now I was using just a 1, even though I've got this dark edge, because I layered it a few times with a 1. So now I can go into this darker edge with a 2 pressure, and I can kind of build that up a little bit to make it darker. Again, not super hard. If you press too hard right away, what happens is you push the tooth of the paper down into the paper, and it's very difficult to get more layers on it. So if you keep your pressure lighter in the very beginning layers, you can build a lot more depth by layering on top of each other. And we do a lot of layering in colored pencil. Now on the video for the raccoon, you're not going to do a ton of layering. We do some, but if I were to actually take you through a full video, like start to finish, very realistic drawing, it would take us hours to create even a 5x7 drawing. So I kind of keep it a little simpler. So we do some layers, we do some blending, but it's kind of like an introduction to full-on colored pencil drawing. So see how I've got this nice blend now? Now as I come out, I can lighten my pressure again because I don't want to just create a black circle. I'm trying to create depth. So I lighten my pressure and I'm trying to blur the lines, right? where I might see, like if I start to see a line of dark or light, I need to get rid of that. I need to blur it out with midtones. So what do I mean by blur out a line? Well, a lot of times what happens is somebody will do something like this. They'll have their circle and they start doing their dark. And instead of using a lighter pressure as they come out, they either forget or they're just starting, they're not used to it. So what happens is we get this kind of look. Almost like a moon look. So rather than making a soft transition between dark to light, we'll get something like this. This line should not be there. It should be nice and smooth like this. So then you either lift some of this color out or you try to blend this line into your midtone by using a midtone pressure. So what I mean by that is I'm probably at a pressure 3 trying to connect this lighter side with this darker side, right? Because I did a 4 or 5 here. So I'm trying to blur this line so it looks more like a gradient and not a hard edge. We don't want hard edges, especially when we're creating fur. We want nice soft fluffiness, okay? So that's how you can kind of try to fix that, by blurring it. And then there's a line here, so we would soften that even more. Very light touch. I'm like literally, it's called glazing the paper. I'm barely touching the paper. So I'm just trying to glaze over it, trying to blend it in, okay? So that happens a lot. So if you can kind of be mindful when you're first starting out, it'll be so much easier for yourself to do this technique. You can always go darker. So I can always go back here and add some darkness. I'm pressing a little harder now, adding that darkness, but I'm trying to avoid any lines from happening. I don't want hard lines. So this is a really great thing to practice in general. So you can sit at night and just practice these little circles, and you will get better at shading, not only for colored pencil, but for painting and drawing in graphite and charcoal. It's the same techniques. Now another way you can do the circles, and I'm not going to do a full one because I don't want to keep you here doing circles all night. But another way to do it is make your circle. Whoops, that's more like an oval. You can have this edge in black, and rather than using one pencil color all the way through, we can transition to different lighter colors. So I can have my darker edge here. I'm still using a pressure, maybe 2, just getting some color down on here. As I come out, I'm still putting some lighter pressure on, but I'm not coming all the way out like I did over here. Okay, so I'm making this a little darker. Just like that. And then I can switch to a midtone color, which would be our 90% gray. So then I can start using that next to the black. And I'm at a pressure 1, but because it's a darker gray, it's going to go ahead and fill in this midtone. So I'm overlapping the black I used, using this darker gray, small circles, coming around the sides, around the bottom. It's okay to go into the black with the dark gray because it's not quite as dark as the black, so I'm just kind of blending it here, blending it by overlapping. Then I can switch to the 30% and put that next to it, which is even lighter, and bring that around. And now you can see I'm starting to get a really nice transitional gradient with 3 different colors. Granted, they're kind of dull. It's a lot more fun to do this with like blues or browns so that you can actually see the transitions. So that's another great way to practice your gradient or your value in your drawings and in your colored pencil. And then it goes to white. And if you have a hard line, you can actually take your white, you can start over here and work your way into the grays to kind of blur that hard line out and soften it. So we're keeping this really white right here, but as we come around, we're blurring it. So just like that. And I'm using harder pressure with white because white is so light, and I'm kind of mushing around the color that's underneath it. You could even go over the whole thing with white. Like if I got this dark enough where I really liked it, I could then blend it all with white over the top, and it will create this really cool soft transition and look on the sphere. So let me just add a little dark, and then I'll do that just to give you an example of what that would look like. So then I could come over here and I could really press hard. This is that 5. It's called burnishing. It's where we're taking all the color that's underneath that we laid down in layers, and we're pushing it all together and mushing it and warming this wax up and getting them to move around on the paper. It's a very common blending technique in colored pencil. So then I could come right around into this darker area. I'm using a 5 pressure, and I'm blending right out. And then if when you get done, you do have a hard line or you need it to be darker, you just go back over it very lightly with the colors that you want. So then I can come back in and I can go ahead and add more darkness to the side and make it pop more. And I would spend a lot of time building this up. We're going to use this technique on the eyes of the raccoon. So you definitely want to get a good feel for it. Good kind of feel for this sphere, this kind of value. So a lot of back and forth in colored pencils. Colored pencils is a very, very patient medium. You have to have patience with it. You don't want to rush. So then as I come out with my black, I'm lightening my touch again, softening it. So I'm blurring that line. I don't want a hard line. But you can see how rather quickly we can get these really cool spheres going on our paper. So we went from a 2D circle to a 3D look. Okay. Now when we do fur, I talk about a couple of things. I talk about don't make soldiers. What I mean by that, and you've probably seen drawings like this. Animals' fur, depending on the type of animal, but in this particular case, the raccoon, is not so much groomed fur. It doesn't lay perfectly. It's a wild animal. It's kind of all over. And when we're doing fur, yes, we do these strokes, these individual strokes. What we don't want to do is we don't want to just make them straight and next to each other. This is what I call soldiers. I see it all the time with people who are just starting out. It's this. So they do fur like that. And then if it's on a curve, say under the eye or something like right here, instead of curving it as a natural eye would, see that little curve? So see, I'm doing this kind of stroke. They'll do it. So instead of doing something like that, where the fur is around the eye, like that bottom eyelid. So instead of doing like this rounded kind of type curve to match the bone structure, they'll do this. They do straight out. Okay, so watch yourself for that. This is what I mean by soldiers. And they'll just stack them like that, little soldiers. So when you're doing fur, whether it's a little curve or straight, you want to overlap your strokes. And you always want your strokes to start like this. You start them down on the paper and you lift up. And you can see this tiny little tapered edge here. And you get that by lifting up. So you start here and you lift. Start here and you lift. This is great too for when you're doing people or whiskers. So people with their eyelashes and stuff, that's a nice tapered hair look. Hair doesn't go blunt like that. It tapers off on the ends. So when we're doing our fur, we want this nice kind of soft stroke. We're always laying down and lifting up. So we get that nice tapered look, and I'm keeping my strokes fairly close to each other and consistent. And what I mean by consistent is not necessarily changing my pressure unless I need to or want to. So say as I'm coming down, it's getting darker, I can add some pressure to this and it darkens it up. And this is what I was also talking about, that gradient, right? So rather than the gradient being in a sphere, it's in a straight line. So we've got this darker area to this much lighter area. And we're going to do that on our raccoon in a couple of places. And we're also going to do that, you can get this gradient with the different colors just like we did here. So we're going to use our blacks and our grays on our raccoon to get that effect. So as I come down, now I'm into the 4s and 5 pressure. Okay, but I'm always trying to lift, put my pencil down and lift it up. And you can go over. Now the other thing, typically, when you see fur on a wild animal, is they don't all stay in one straight line. Sometimes it crosses over. So we have this kind of effect, right? And that's fine. Again, so see how we have this like kind of craziness going on? You'll see that in some photos. If you start looking at animal photos, you see all these different types of fur. So you get this kind of meshed, mushy, mashed up look, rather than this very straight look. Sometimes you have both in an animal, so you always have to be watching your reference photo and following the fur. The other thing is you always want to follow the direction of the fur. So say like on a dog, which we're not doing today, but say this is the nose, right? The top of the nose. So oftentimes the fur on a dog kind of comes up like this. It's very short, but as it comes around the edge, the fur turns and turns down. So I always want to be watching that when I'm working on my reference photo, to watch the direction of the fur, because that helps make things look realistic. Okay, you won't have that so much with the raccoon. I'm just letting you know this for any future drawings you might do. It's a big thing that a lot of beginners miss. They just kind of make their fur any which way. They don't really pay attention, and it really changes how realistic something can look. So always kind of be mindful of that. So you always want to you want to follow the direction of the fur. You don't want to make little soldiers. You want to keep your strokes nice and soft. You want to stack them next to each other and overlap. And you always want to lift your fur. You always want to lift your pencil up off to get that nice tapered look. So something like that. Okay, so if I were to actually build this nose on a dog, I would continue up this muzzle part with different colors depending on what the colors are, and work my way around using very light pressure, because again I would come back in with other colors and build this up. So say I want to add some brown in here, I would take my brown and I can go right over it and build it up and add color. So see, we're starting to get these different colors, but I'm using a very light pressure so that I can do that. If I were to use a hard pressure right away, so say this is my black, and I go in and I make, I do it really hard right away, like I'm at a 4. See, I've got this muzzle and I'm building this fur up, and then I try to put my sienna brown over it. See how it's so different? Do you see the look is so different? So from that, and I know it's hard to see this, right? But it would be, you build this over time. You build these in layers so that you can see what's happening underneath the other layers. So then I could take some violet blue and shoot this in here. And I can make these very beautiful color combinations that add depth and interest to your drawing. But I wouldn't want to start that way. I have to start soft. So I could continually build this up. And you will see that over time, all these colors start to blend and play together and make these beautiful colors underneath that add a lot of interest to your drawings. So if you can remember these little tips and techniques, you'll have much better drawings in the end. And it takes absolute practice. It doesn't just happen overnight. Okay. I think I'm going to show you a couple erasing techniques, but I think that's really all we need. Oh, you know what else you will need for your drawing is a brush, a paintbrush, just a small one. I like to use round brushes because I like the point on them. See how it has a little bit of a tapered edge, and it's smaller, but you can use any brush. If all you have is like a Crayola brush from a Crayola kit, use it. It's fine. We're going to use the watercolor pencils as a preliminary layer, so it's not a big deal. This isn't like precision work. So don't go crazy trying to find a paintbrush in your house. You could even use a Q-tip if you needed to. You could wet a Q-tip and get the paint to move. That'll be in the second video. So if we wanted to erase something, and say we've got a lot of layers built up, or say you went and did something really dark right away, right? And you're trying to erase it, and it's really, really hard to erase, because once you press hard 2, you've embedded it into the paper. So, but you want to get this off. one of the things you can do, or say you have a really small area that you want to clean up and you don't want to take a big bulky eraser in, you can use Scotch tape. And I use this a lot for my drawings when I need to lift. So you have this clear tape, you just stick part of it to your hand and you hold it like this. And then what you're going to do, let me make a bigger spot here so I can show you. This is our violet blue. And what you can do is you can come in with a sharp pencil. I usually just use a regular pencil. You can hover it over the spot that you want to lift. Don't push it down because that's going to stick to the paper and lift all the area. But say I just want to put a white line or a lighter line in here, I hover it. I'm just holding it over the spot, and then I'm taking my pencil above it and I'm marking the spot with the pencil. And see how it lifted, see that color? See how it lifted a spot here? So, whoop. Let me do it this way. There we go. You can lift color this way. See, I want to lift a spot, like a highlight that I screwed up. You can lift color with your, see that? You just have to keep doing it with your Scotch tape. So you can lift a spot. Whoops, I actually went through on that. So you slowly lift it. This is a great way to kind of get yourself, it's without damaging your paper. See, when you erase on your paper, you actually start to damage the fibers. So see how it's getting much lighter in this area and this area is darker? I can just keep going at it like that to lift a spot and slowly lift it to a lighter color, where then if I needed to, I could use an eraser or not. Maybe I've got it lifted to what I want and go back over it and fix whatever I need to. But see how that got lighter and lighter? So it doesn't damage the fibers of the paper. So as much as if you were to go in with a really hard eraser and just scrub it. You don't really want to do that. Then if I wanted to, I could just go over the top of this. Now what's nice about the kneaded erasers is I can put some pressure on this, just like the tape, and slowly lift the color off just by blotting. So it's very hard to get colored pencil off of a sheet of paper once you've pressed really, really hard. And that's the other reason why you don't want to go in really hard right away, because it's extremely difficult to get that paper to white again. Okay, there's other ways around it too. We could always take white. We could always push white over it. It's never going to get it right back to white, but it definitely lightens it after we get some of the pigment off. And we can keep doing that. So we clean our white pencil because it's got debris on it now. We clean it off, and then we can go this way over it and kind of clear that spot. So there are ways to fix any errors. Depending on the error, depends on how you're going to attack it. Like we're good, so we can go ahead now and jump into our pencil pail drawing. So now what you want to do is scan the next QR code with the next link. It will take you to the video. It's about a 2-hour video, so if you need to grab yourself something to drink and a snack, go ahead and do that. And I'll see you in the next video, and we'll start drawing our raccoon. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see all of your creations. Have a great day.